In October 66, the Hebrew rebels achieved a brilliant victory over Roman forces in the narrow gorge of Beth-Horon. The fighting was so intense that most of the Roman soldiers perished, including their legate, Cestius Gallus, and nearly every officer. News of this resounding Hebrew victory spread like wildfire, prompting a general Jewish uprising against Rome. Within a few weeks, some 60,000 Jews rose up, armed with clubs, hammers, and sickles. They murdered more than 5,000 unarmed Roman auxiliary soldiers and freed 20,000 prisoners from Roman jails. Though this slaughter of defenseless non-combatants shocked even the evil Ceneville, the revolt quickly spread throughout Judea. Soon Cestius's entire army was in full retreat. This general uprising proved fatal for the Hebrew nation. Modern Israel occupies a small land area, slightly less than the U.S. state of New Jersey. In ancient times, the region was poor, bereft of natural resources, and barely able to provide for itself. It could hardly resist Roman power. The area was important because it formed a highway between the larger empires of the Assyrians, Babylonians, and the Persians to the east, and the Egyptians, and finally the Greeks and Romans to the west. The unique contribution of the Jews to the west was their development of an exclusive monotheism, the belief in a single, all-powerful God, Jehovah, who watched over his chosen people but also demanded a high standard of ethical conduct on pain of severe punishment. No people in history were to fight more tenaciously for their liberty against greater odds. The belief of Jews in their uniqueness, along with their intolerance of other religions, created in the ancient world a sense of separation and widespread animosity against them. In 63 BC, Roman consul Pompey Magnus, Pompey the Great, moved to annex Syria, making it a Roman province. Pompey next laid siege to Jerusalem and took it. Roman soldiers secured the temple there, cutting down its priests with the sword. Although he preserved the temple treasury, Pompey dared to visit the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest was allowed. This typified Roman rule thereafter. Jews constituted only a small proportion, about 6 to 9% of the Roman Empire's population, but this did not keep them from being a constant problem. Roman insensitivity, sacrilege, and plain stupidity produced riots and uprisings that brought savage reprisals. Consequently, this part of the empire attracted only the dregs of the Roman civil service. A string of maladroit decrees and a succession of inept Roman administrators fed Jewish extremism and convinced many Jews that a day of reckoning was inevitable. These determined Jews came to be known as Zealots. Matters came to a head in May 66 CE under Roman procurator Gessius Florus. His tactless decisions led to rioting, and the Zealots seized control of Jerusalem, promised amnesty, the Roman forces holding the Antonia fortress that overlooked the temple precinct were nonetheless slaughtered. Gessius soon lost control of Judea and appealed to the Roman governor of Syria, legate Cestius Gallus at Antioch, who had available a much larger force of 4 legions. Cestius took 3 months to assemble an expeditionary force, however, centered on the 14th Fulminate, Thunderbolt Legion of 4,800 men. It included another 6,000 legionnaires, 2,000 from each of the other 3 legions. Cestius also had some 2,000 cavalry and 5,000 auxiliary infantries in 6 cohorts. Rome's allies, King Antiochus IV of Commagene and King Sohamomus of Emesa, furnished slingers and javelin throwers, perhaps another 32,000 men. Some 2,000 Greek militias of Syria also joined, eager to participate in any action against Jews. In October 66, Cestius easily subdued Galilee. His men unleashed a terror campaign of widespread destruction in the expectation that this would both remove any threat to his rear area and intimidate the Jewish population along the route to Jerusalem. Leaving moderate forces to hold Galilee, Cestius also detached units to secure the seaport of Joppa. The Romans razed Joppa and slew perhaps 8,000 people there. Additional Roman columns secured other potential rebel strongholds. So the Jewish rebels had thrown back the Romans and recovered some of their siege engines. They then used these to batter the Roman walls. But overall, Cestius decided to take his army away from the city and to try to get them resupplied by moving them to the coast. However, the coastal road went through the same Beth-Horon gorge that he'd come in through. And again, he didn't bother to post pickets on the hills overlooking the narrow pass. So again, the Jews were able to attack his forces who were in single file. Through the defile, other Jewish forces moved to block the Roman escape, and so began the Battle of Beth-Horon, which quickly turned into a rout. The Romans broke and ran, leaving behind all of their baggage and nearly 6,000 men killed. The eagle standard of the First Jewish Legion was also lost. All of the equipment that the Jews captured would serve them effectively in combating Roman siege operations 4 years later. Cestius was not seriously wounded in the fighting, but evidently he decided that he had had enough. He and the bulk of his force escaped, but they left behind all of their baggage, including their siege equipment. That meant that the siege of Jerusalem was over for the moment. Cestius hoped to complete his campaign before the heavy autumnal rains could make quagmires of the roads. But Jewish resistance was stiffer than he expected, and the approach of winter made him even more eager to get his men out of Judea. To this point, Jewish resistance was sporadic and apparently unorganized. So Cestius believed that his terror campaign had worked. He may have thought that the Jews would fall into a panic and offer the city without a fight. In any event, he was confident that he would be able to wrap things up quickly once he got his men back to the coast. As it turned out, the Jews fought better in the field than they had in earlier Roman engagements. Moreover, a large number of Jews who hitherto had not joined the fighting now rose up against the Romans. Most of them lived in the Galilee and in the northern Samaria. They set up camp on Mount Scopus, less than a mile from the city. The Zealots, however, refused to treat with any emissaries and even put one to death. After several days of waiting, on October 15th, Cestius sent his men into Jerusalem. The Jews fell back to the inner city wall. The Romans burned the suburb of Bethesda, expecting that this would bring submission. It did not. So the Romans launched full-scale attacks, but failed to penetrate the Jewish defenses. Following a week of this, Cestius suddenly withdrew. Stiffer than expected, Jewish resistance, the approach of winter and shortages of supplies, and mules for transport were the factors in his decision.